Hi, this is Alan Faubion. I'm here today on an interview with my sister, Melinda Davidson. Uh, Melinda is just a little bit older than I am. She's my big sister. I'm her little brother. But on this whole journey that we've had in our lives over the last number of years about learning how to listen to the voice of the Lord and respond to Him, much of that time, Melinda and I have been on a very similar, if not parallel, track. We both grew up in a family that always went to church. Melinda became a believer as a 16-year-old, and she's the one who dragged me to a meeting where I got saved as a 14-year-old. So again, she was always key in bringing me to these points, not really knowing what it was about, but just knowing that somehow I should go. Well, then, of course, we became adults, went to school. I went to seminary. She went into her coursework, got married, had children. We had children, and all those things went on. And after into our adult lives, there finally came a point where once again, God began to do things in our lives in a parallel way. For me and for Mindy and I and our family, it was a key transition point that was a very difficult transition point that we were in. It wasn't, at this juncture, wasn't quite a desperation point, but it was very close to one. And it was during a time when I had tried to learn how to listen to the Lord, and it just didn't work for me at that point. But not long after that, my sister engaged me again because we were getting ready to begin or launch a ministry in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. And I was wanting to make sure that this time I didn't do things like I did it before. And so I began to ask questions about things I had never asked. And one of those was about going into different levels of prayer and intercession. At this point, my sister invited me to a meeting where I came in connection with some people, but especially with a particular book, resource, that was the catalyst that after reading that book in the next couple of weeks, the Spirit of God came on me and I began to speak in tongues and pray in the Spirit. And then after that, that launched me on my path of learning how to listen to God. And the meeting in which that really things were unlocked for that to begin to take place, my sister invited me to that meeting as well. And then in the course of all of that, she also began to experience the Spirit. She also began to experience new levels of interaction with God and began to hear what the Lord had to say. So I wanted to invite her today because we're in this critical time period of coming into a new depth and level of our interaction, what I call our face-to-face interaction with God, whereby we hear Him as He speaks to things that are going on around our lives, and then we, as we allow Him to speak into us and receive what He says, it activates faith within us, and we're able to do all that He's prepared for us, and we're able to experience what He's prepared for us on our path. So without saying a whole lot more introduction than that, again, Melinda, thank you for being with us today. Say hi.
Hi, glad to be here.
Now, Melinda, I want you to just briefly share about what kind of a transition it was for you as an adult to move from what I would call a very committed, dedicated church kind of person, okay, to this level where the Spirit of God is moving in you differently. Was that a big shift for you?
Oh, yes. It was a huge shift for me. I was still very involved in my local church, and I still am today. It is an evangelical Christian church, and it's they don't talk about this sort of thing there. So I had to really ask the Lord to help me find places that would teach me the right thing. Just explain to me what this means to go deeper with God. And it was then that the Lord began to take me into opportunities that I couldn't have even imagined. That just, I mean, my husband was very willing for me to go to some of these events that talked about these sorts of things. And I began to have a desire for more of God. I knew there was more, and I just couldn't put my finger on what that was. And
Okay, so you really, I mean, you did have to step way out of your comfort zone into things you had no idea about.
absolutely, yes.
Okay. And so did everything go smooth and well from that point on?
No. I, I I guess with anything new, you think everything's gonna just fall into place immediately, and like you're gonna have an easy route getting to the next step. But for me, and I think probably for most people, it is a slow learning route. It's something completely new. And so as I was struggling with that and understanding, hearing his, thinking I heard his voice, and then thinking, well, what if I didn't hear his voice? What if it really wasn't? And then people around me saying, oh, you can't hear his voice, you know, that type of thing.
Okay.
It was a struggle, a big struggle. And so what I ended up doing was the Lord reminded me about my grandchildren. I had little ones. And when they were learning how to walk, you know, they didn't learn quickly. They toddled and they held on, and then they let go, and then they'd fall on their little bottom and that sort of thing. And I remember thinking, you know, with a child that's learning to walk, you don't just kick them around when they don't get up and walk immediately. It's a process, and you have to practice, and finally they start walking. So that's what I realized, that was what was happening to me. It was a process, and yes, I made mistakes, but there were a lot of times that I didn't make mistakes. So I think I had to be okay with that, and that was a challenge.
Yeah. What was it in the beginning as you were making this shift? What was it that prompted you, or even gave you the idea that you should make a shift?
Oh, when I came into the Spirit, when I, what do you say, have a prayer language now, I said that's when shifting started for
Okay.
me.
Okay.
And I was amazed that you could speak in the Spirit even when you're just walking down the street. You didn't have to sit there and put your hands together and bow your head. In other words, it was in your heart, in your mind. And the Lord was showing me that he wanted me to go. He just started talking to me a little bit. I just began to, little by little, realizing that something was missing. I mean, it was just something, it was just a feeling I had that something was just not completely there yet, you know, that there was more to this. And he'd wake me up at night and talk to me. And I think the first time he called me by name, that was huge. I mean, when he said my name and that he loved me, it was like my entire body just completely went into praise. And I just sat there going, I can't believe he just talked to me. You know, those are the kinds of steps I took.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. For those steps to happen, did you go to classes? Did someone teach you this would happen like this? How did that happen to you? Did it surprise you?
Well, I think I had you in my life. So
Yeah.
you were experiencing things, okay? And God just brought me into contact with several people who began to share things that were happening to them, okay? So sometimes that helps me just to hear somebody else talking. That's why these videos that you're doing and all is encouraging to me, because it just shows me a different aspect maybe I hadn't thought of before in a different way. So I think it was that. It was listening to others, but then also then wanting it for myself. I mean, why did I even want a prayer language? I mean, there was something in me that said there's more. And I had been
Right.
searching for that, and there was and I couldn't do it on my own. For some reason, I guess it was all that religion stuff in me that was telling me it couldn't happen. And so I had to get out of that. And that's when that changed my life. And yeah. So,
Yeah, because you'd been, like you and I both had been involved in many, many Bible studies and prayer meetings and worship settings and stuff for years before we came to this point. Those things didn't bring us to those points, you know?
No, and I was over in my prior church, I had a responsibility of leading the prayer ministry. God took me through a whole lot during that point.
Yeah.
A whole lot. And I grew a lot during that because I had to be honest with my pastor that I was now had this prayer language. I wanted to be open with that. So if he felt that I should step down, that I would. But he didn't. He said,
Okay.
nope, stay right where you are. And I appreciated that. And so I was open. I didn't try to keep that secret. And I also shared it with my family. I shared it with all my children and my husband and some of my friends. And so I was not trying to keep it a secret completely.
Yeah. 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 Now, the one thing that people don't know about you, and that's been a big part, voice. When we talk about listening to the voice of God, voice has always been a big part of your life.
Yes.
Since you were a small child, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, you began singing as a vocalist, especially in religious settings, eventually in school settings and other settings, but primarily in religious settings, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, no, I remember well because I went to all the recitals and went to all the performances where I got to listen to you. And then you played in our home, and it was good, real good. Yeah.
Well, you and I sang well together. We were a good team.
Well, yeah, that's where I learned to sing, was from you. So you carry that voice. But there came a point in your life where something happened to your voice. Okay, I want you to just talk a little bit about what led up to that time. Okay, I mean, what things were like going up to this time, what happened, and then what eventually happened.
Well, I had a growth.
No, before you go there, now for those watching this, we're brother and sister, so we can do this. Okay, we can stop each other. Before you go there, I want you to talk about your history of your voice and how you used it to serve the Lord.
Well, I have been singing since I was 3, and all my life I had considered that to be a part of who Melinda is. It was my identity. Okay, and so going through high school and college, I even was a voice major at the university level for a while. But because of some other problems, I ended up changing my degree. But I was given opportunities to sing and do things that I never thought I could do. And that was because I had a decent voice. People said it was really pretty. I don't know. I can't say that so much about myself. But anyway, I really did feel that was a gift from God. And when I would sing for church or weddings or whatever, I always gave it to the Lord, and I asked him to help me to sing with him, and that he would sing through me. I just did that. That was normal. So that was where I was. I was singing a lot. I sang in groups and organizations I was a part of. So I loved it. It was who I was. It was how I worshiped. It was how I felt good about myself, because it set me apart. I felt like I was always struggling in my classwork and all that, but I was set apart in the music category. So that made me feel better about myself when I had something special, that type of thing. And then do you want me to go further then?
Well, so then as you go through adulthood and so forth, and start having kids, you're still singing. You were singing for a Christian women's club. You were actually traveling different locations for different kinds of meetings to sing and to share some things in those meetings, right?
Yes, I did. I shared my testimony, and Yes, and I worked with groups like that.
So then, what happened?
Well, at one point, I was working at a university, putting one of my children through college there, and I developed a physical issue that meant I needed to have some surgery on my thyroid. I had to have it most of it removed, and when my husband and I were in there talking to the doctors about it, he said, my wife is a singer. She sings all the time, and we're just asking, how are you going to make sure that she can come out of this being able to still sing? And they were very, very positive and said, oh, well, there'll be two of us in there. When we're in there together, we'll be able to make sure everything's working properly, and she'll be fine. And, they give you this long list of all these things that could go wrong, and you have to sign the bottom of it to say, if these things happen, you're not going to sue them, whatever. And so we did that, and I went in for my surgery, and yeah, they did some damage. That was very difficult. I couldn't sing with any strength anymore. I couldn't hold a note for lengthy time at all. I had nothing like that I used to be able to do. I had several issues with it, and they were all keeping me from being able to sing like I did for all those years. Everything stopped. Everything changed. It took me, unfortunately, about 2 years to grieve that, because it was almost like cutting off a leg or an arm. It was so much part of me that I just could not. It was just hard to deal with. And
Well,
I finally got
it was never a gift that you kept to yourself. So there were many other people who enjoyed it. So then you go through a period of time, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. During this period of time where there's no singing voice, where you've lost your sound, where the sound of your voice was no longer what it had been, okay? You also went through another set of circumstances that were also quite difficult. What were those?
Okay, I'm not sure which circumstance.
About mother.
Oh, okay. Yes. In 2012, my parents ended up needing to move to an assisted living area here in my area where I live. And so that's what happened. So I was working full time at the time and helped them get situated in this new location. And then my father died not long after moving there. My mother, we moved her into memory care because of her cognitive issues. So my dad was gone. Alan was doing a lot of traveling all over the world, so he was very busy. So it was really pretty much up to me to be there for Mother and to help her to get through this. So that was probably, dealing with someone with Alzheimer's is a challenge to anyone. Fortunately, she was living there, which was good, and I was able to go see her very often. She didn't live far. And I would spend hours and hours, 4 hours at a time with her. And I watched her in and out of hospitals, falling. She was a fall risk. And she was very anxious. And there were so many things that would come up that I would need answers to. And Alan, I didn't know the answers. And Mother was not where she could explain it to me because she couldn't remember. Doctors were asking questions. Things were happening to her. I was watching her just struggled so much. I think I have never cried that much. I did all of my grieving prior to her actual physical walking into heaven. It was so difficult. I was desperate for God because I could not. You were gone a lot of the time. Not that I couldn't have called you because you were always available to call. But as we know, I was here. So you could travel. And so I felt so overwhelmed with this responsibility of my mom. And it was eating my lunch, but I knew that I needed God. And he was the only one I could turn to. I was totally dependent. No one else could help me. I was just desperate. So that's when everything shifted in me. I had to listen to him. I clung to him for every day, every breath I took. It was just, I was just desperate.
What in the middle of that time, how did your interaction with God shift? Okay, and what kind of changes did you see?
What I saw the most was that he answered me. He talked to me. He literally, there was moments where Mother was doing something so unusual, and it was very concerning, and she could easily fall. And I would go to him and say, Lord, I don't get it. Here's what's happening. And what am I supposed to do? And he would tell me what to do. But you know, that part of me that still wants to be in control would say, oh, that doesn't, because what he would tell me to do just did not make any sense. Just didn't make any sense to me. And because what he was asking me to do seemed like it would make the problem worse. So, yeah. So those were situations that would come up all over the place. And because I was power of attorney, I found out what that means. That when God told me to take, he would do this. When she was experiencing some really strange things, he said, take her off that medication. Take her off. And I would have to believe that and go tell the nurses, take her off until the doctor calls, just don't give it to her anymore. And this was an experience that the next day I saw her again and she was just fine. That medication was lethal to her, but I wouldn't have known that, let's put it that way, unless God had told me.
Well, and it wasn't, and be honest, right? It really wasn't your bent, your way to just do something contrary to what the doctors would say, or that someone. I mean, you always were as a young girl and as a adult woman, someone who wanted to please the people that were around you.
Yes, I was definitely a people pleaser, and I certainly thought the doctors knew better than I did.
Yeah.
For sure. I had already experienced some things, and I sometimes look back at my experience with my thyroid and I think, it could have been different if I had done this different, but that's, you can always say, what if I had done, but I'm grateful because of what happened later. But during this particular time, I just needed God to show me what to do day to day. I wrote it all down in a journal. So the other day I went back through it and I just was amazed at all the ways God would just tell me things and have me do this and have me do that. And it was just amazing. Alan, the interesting thing is I have tried to share this information with people that I know who are experiencing stuff like this.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody hears me. They all look at me like I'm from another planet, because it's like, what? Why would you do that? Well, I'm so grateful God threw me into this situation. You weren't around. My daddy wasn't around. My husband was working. It was up to me to figure out what to do. But there was one experience that I have shared before that I continue to share if it's okay for me to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was sitting down in my living room having a pity party. And I was thinking to myself, I am the responsible one. I'm always the one that has to, I'm sorry, Alan.
Yeah.
I'm the responsible one. I am the one that has to take care of Mother. Why, Lord, are you doing this to me? Why? I'm not good at this. I'm not blah, blah, blah. And then finally it was like, he looked at my face, and I swear to you, it was his eyeballs to my eyeballs, I believe, because it was so close. And he said, 1, you are not responsible for your mother. I am. 2, I want you to love, what you are to do, Melinda, is to love your mother well, listen to my voice, and do what I tell you to do. Can you do that? That's what he said, and I went, okay. And it was like when I said yes, when I agreed with what he said, when I didn't argue with him, like I could do sometimes, and I was actually able, at that point, when that happened, all of that feeling resentful and fearful and all the things about being the responsible one, it just, all that just
Okay, we're picking up. We had a little bit of a problem with the internet, but now that we're back together here, so this time caring for mother was your testing period. It was a time for God to train you in how to hear him in very specific ways, in very important circumstances. In some sense, life was on the line. Mother's life was, and so all the things that you might have relied on before were no longer available to you.
Correct.
So during this time, how did it change your whole perspective? I mean, God's speaking to you very directly. He's telling you things you've never heard before, okay, about yourself, about others. How did this begin to, what did it do inside of you? How did it make you feel?
Okay. Well, I can't tell you that everything was rosy once that experience between the Lord and I happened. You know, when I was talking about, okay. But, you know, I think what I felt was just peace, a lot more peace. I quit being so nervous and anxious and fearful. Not that I didn't have moments of fear and anxiety. I'm not saying I did it perfectly, but I knew that when he spoke the words to me to do something, that he would then make it happen. You know, it came power. There's power involved in that. So I learned that from you, understanding when the Lord speaks to you that it takes on a life of its own. But you do have a choice at that point whether to agree or to not agree. And I realized that that's very important because later on when he spoke something to me that's pretty special, I had a choice then as well. And it's a time where, you know, it's like you just have to go with it or not. So I went with it, and that's when I said yes to it, then there was that God just took care of all the other details that came later. And he just helped me more and more as each day would go by to be more at peace, to trust him, to keep asking him, because he was my only source of understanding my mother.
Yeah.
I could not understand her physical needs, okay?
Right.
I didn't know all that was going on inside of her, in her mind, or in her anxiety. She was frightened, and she was, just different. But she and I developed, I still was able to have a relationship with her that was beautiful. We still made memories that I'll never forget. I just am so grateful for all the time God gave her to us. And I'm glad that I was able to not be so worried and fearful all the time, that I could take her hand and I could talk to her about how God loves her. I could show her by just my calmness that it was nothing to be frightened about, that she's going to be okay, that she's got me, I'm here,
Yeah.
So you just have to, I'm grateful for that. That was a huge part of being able to make it through that season of my life.
So this, part of your testimony is the fact that during this, what was an extremely personally difficult time, in which you, in a sense, were isolated. In other words, it was just you and the situation. That really was the whole place that brought you into this new level of interaction with your God, where you're speaking with him eyeball to eyeball, and he's speaking to you. So now, mother passed in 2015. Now, your throat had an issue. Your throat issue began in 2007, right? Okay. When mother died in 2015, the problem, you still didn't have your voice. But
well, it's not, Alan, it's not that I couldn't put something.
No, I know your singing voice. You couldn't sing. You had no strength. A voice has to have strength to it. Okay. And so anyway, over the next year, in 2015, March 2015 till basically, let's call it March 2016. It maybe wasn't quite that exact. Okay. You encountered another situation, this time with your granddaughter. Okay. And your granddaughter was in the hospital for condition and so forth. Okay, and things were happening. Without going into a lot of detail about what her condition was, just knowing that it was a difficult time, a time when it's easy to become afraid or fearful or worry and all these kinds of things. Having come through this time with Mother, you now come into this time. Describe the difference this time. Tell what went on with you there, how it was different for you.
Yeah. Well, this was different. It wasn't my own children. It was my granddaughter, and she was little, and so yeah, it was tough. Well, because of what I'd experienced with Mother, I just laid this before the Lord as well. I asked what to do, how to help her. I asked the Lord, and He told me to call you. And I did call you, told you this whole situation and all. And Alan, you were the one that gave me some instructions of what I needed to do over a period of about a week. And at that point, I had a decision of whether I was going to go with that or not, yes or no. And I chose to go with it. And so for 7 days, I did what you asked me to do.
What did I ask you to do? What did I ask you to do?
You told me to I had a recording of your first shofar CD, Sound the Shofar.
Yeah.
And I had an app. There was an app that you all had on there for a while. You don't have the app. But the app gave you an opportunity to play certain sequences of the shofar. And you told me what the sequence was to be. You told me there was so many of this and this and that. So I was able to make that happen on my phone. And then you told me to call them and call the kids, and then I ended up playing it over the phone so that they could hear it. And I played it for 7 days, like you had said. And so I started and I ended just like it. And she was in the hospital, and they could not figure out what her problems were. She was having all kinds of issues. And by the end of the week, she had come home, and that's when she just got better. I mean, she had one little setback at the beginning, and then she was fine, and they never could figure out what the problem was. But I did follow through, okay, which is huge for me to follow through.
Yeah.
And that was, that was in 2016.
Now, so then, a very short time after that, what did the Lord tell you about your voice?
It was in my journal, or I simply would not have remembered it. That's why, to me, it's very important to write things down that God tells me. In my journal, wherever He speaks to me, I always highlight it in yellow. That way, I know it's Him. And the other things I put in there all the time that I say, but then when He speaks. So anyway, I just, He told me, He said, Melinda, He said, in one of the times He was speaking to me, He said, I want your voice. I want to give you your voice back. I want your voice to be healed. And my response to that was, thank you, Lord. I would love that, but I wasn't expecting it, to be honest. But it was a nice thing that He said to me.
Sound like a courtesy, huh?
I mean, because come on, I didn't have a thyroid, and this has been messed up for 9 years, and it's like I just figured I was going to go to my deathbed with this issue. I didn't think anything else.
Yeah.
And then 2 days later, that was on, I guess, a Friday, and then on a Sunday, I was in church, my regular church, and my husband plays the tuba, so he was getting ready and with the orchestra, and anyway, and I was just sitting in a pew, doing nothing but waiting for the service to start, and Holy Spirit just said, I've healed your voice. He first said that. He said, Melinda, I've healed your voice. I want you to open your mouth and sing the whole service, and I want you to have fun. He was telling me all these things that I had been wanting for 9 years to do. And I sat there shocked. My whole body was shaking, and I was going, okay, it's another point. Do I trust Him and agree with Him or not? What am I going to do with that?
Yeah.
Well, so I chose to trust Him. I chose to say, yes, Lord. I sang through the entire service, never got a sore throat. Normally, if I sang even a little bit, at all, just trying to sing, I would get hoarse, where I couldn't talk at all, and I could not sustain a note, and I could not get up high like I used to. So there was none of that prior. And then he told me he healed me, and I was sang through the entire service, and I sang up high, I sang up low, I sustained a note, and I didn't have any hoarseness. It was like, he just did it. I mean, he was like, okay, thank you, Lord. I mean, it was just, I was just crazy happy. And then throughout the next several months, I tested.
Yeah.
Because I knew in different situations how my voice had reacted in the past. And now all of a sudden I started trying it in different things, and yeah, but anyway, and God won, you know. So he did heal, but it had been 9 years since I'd used those vocal cords. Okay, so even though he gave me this wonderful opportunity to sing that day and some other days later, there came a point where he told me he wanted me to take lessons from a teacher that I'd had before. And I did, for voice lessons, and just for stretching. It wasn't to sing. It wasn't about the singing voice. It was about just stretching. It's like muscles or anything in your body.
Yeah.
You got to strengthen.
Rehab.
And so I went through 1.5 years of that. Yeah, and he kept telling me, I will tell you when to stop your lessons. And I would get to places where I sounded so horrible, and I hated to hear myself sing because it was nothing like what I'd done before. And my voice teacher, who I love dearly, she's a strong Christian anyway, she would tell me more things about my voice that she could hear that I couldn't. And it just, some days I'd get that call and I'd think, oh Lord, can we stop this? This is driving me crazy. He'd say, Melinda, I said I would tell you when it's time to quit your lessons. So I don't know how many times he told me that. But at the very, very end, at 1.5 years, I had finally made a turn in my singing, and things were starting to sound better and more like what they used to, my voice used to. And that's when the Lord said, okay, it's time to stop. I went, no, I mean, I'm just now getting there. And he said, you got to stop, and you're going to tell he just told me what to do, and I did it. And that was the right thing to do. But it was just that he told me, he says, I will now become your teacher.
Wow.
So it's those kinds of things that's just how I had to live my life. And I will say this, though, and this is just for everybody's sake. After Mother died, and I wasn't so desperate for God, okay?
Yeah.
Because Mother was gone, right? So what happened? I began to go back into some of my old ways. I have to admit, I did. I mean, I would still hear his voice, but there would be days I would just go do stuff. I wouldn't even think about him or want to ask him if he'd help me or anything. It was just like, I felt like my life was just blah again. And I told him, I said, Lord, what? And then, what's happened since that time, not only this thing with my voice, but also in other things, that he came back and he would allow me to go through other situations. I had a really bad pneumonia situation that was really bad. It was really bad. It got really, really bad. And it was through that that was another desperate time. In other words, I think he has to take me through these desperate times so that I get focused on him again. And that I don't know why we do that, but you read all through the Bible about how the Israelites did that. I mean, God would take them this way and do miraculous things, and then they'd go back to their old ways. And that's just the way we do too sometimes. So you kind of just have to repent.
Yeah.
And just get your mind in the right direction again. You get back with what you know is true.
Yeah. Now, as you've done that, you and I were talking just a bit ago, and I don't know that I'd ever seen it this way. It was in 2007 that you lost your singing voice, and in 2016, 9 years later, the Lord supernaturally, miraculously heals it. No one laid hands on you at the time. He simply spoke it to you. It wasn't a healing service. It wasn't special circumstances. It was his time, and you were where he wanted you to be when he wanted to do it. Okay?
And that was
You were listening. You were listening and responding. And you learned that over time. But there came these critical points where you had to do very specific things that didn't always make sense or didn't others wouldn't necessarily have agreed with. And they were all things you couldn't read in the Bible. There were things you had to hear from him himself. And you were able to, because God speaks that way, and you were willing to receive it and move that way. Isn't it interesting that it took losing your voice to be able to come to a place where you could enter into a connection with his voice that would ultimately end up in restoring yours? Amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing work of God. And as I think of all people who are watching this now, and we'll watch it in the days ahead, who are going through difficult moments that they just can't, the moments don't make sense. And they're not how anyone would have planned for them to happen. But there's such a mighty work of restoration that God wants to do for those who will simply let him say what he wants to say and will do what he says to them. It's a mighty thing. You don't have to have a degree to do this. You don't have to have years of professional ministry experience. None of that counts for any of this. What you've experienced, truly, I would give up years of ministry to have this kind of experience. And I have had those kinds of experience, and I had to give up ministry for it. And you had to give up things for it to get there. But you got there, and God is taking you even further beyond that. So anyway, I thank you for sharing those things, deeply personal.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. It's nice to be able to do that.